2008, Mal Yeo gave us a talk on his wild ride in a Qantas aircraft, QF72, on the way back from Singapore. It had only happened a few weeks before, and since then quite a number of things have happened, and we've got him back to tell us what happened and what was the ultimate outcome of all that. So Mal, it's over to you.
Thank you. Well, I really didn't expect to be back here again so soon. After all, that happened in 2008. But a number of people have been kind enough to ask after my general health and so on in the last few years, and in particular they seem to remember my shoulder. And so the fact that CASA has completed its inquiry into the accident it's time, I suppose, to stop well-meaning people coming in and investigating to see exactly what happened by actually telling you instead. So this was, the original talk was done back in October 2008, and I told people at that stage I'm using basically the presentation that I did then, but without so much talk. You'll be happy about that second part. And I pointed out at that stage that I've been on a couple of inaugural flights. I was on the inaugural flight from Chandakot to West Subiaco Aerodrome, which unfortunately had been disbanded 30 years before by the time I used it, and was then known as Macgillivray Oval. That was the result of that flight. And I even had a zipper installed in my head there to, just in case anything needed to be added in future years.
It didn't work.
It didn't work. The next inaugural flight that I did was a short time later in 2008, as opposed to 1966. And that was that flight. First flight done by Qantas from Singapore to Learmonth. And that was the aftermath of that flight. So I have made a resolution not to do any more inaugural flights. They hurt. This one was out of Singapore, as you probably gathered by this stage. Singapore at the time, as you can see, the lines all done up because it was that time of the year in which they had the checkered flag, because the previous week had been the Grand Prix. And we're flying out, and we intended to go to there. Quite a normal intention. As we've seen by recent times, Southeast Asian flights sometimes aren't normal. Because this is the flight that the aircraft did. Now I had to fit it on the screen because this was done over several minutes actually, like about 6 altogether, or 4 altogether, sorry. When the aircraft, to this passenger who happened to be standing by a galley in the rear of the aircraft, talking to one of the flight attendants at the time, I won't say what my wife said I was doing, chatting up or something, but she should know me better than that. Anyway, she ducks out of the picture at that stage because she was left sitting in a seat like all the rest of us were prior to that, because we were having lunch, when the aircraft carried out that particular flight profile. I'll tell you a bit more about it later, but not much, because my first knowledge that something odd was happening was a mighty rushing wind and being pushed down towards the ground by the ceiling. It was a case of, here am I on the ceiling, cannot move around, I lower my undercarriage, and that's all I can do, but it doesn't reach the floor because the ceilings are relatively high in that part of the aircraft. So I spent a little time on the ceiling, and then it desisted for a little while, and you can see in the flight profile why. And let me tell you that Newton's first law unfortunately does work. So there I was, being pushed down towards the floor. Eventually, after a little while, I got back to the floor. Only the floor was a little bit daunting because this was right by the galley, and a lot of bottles of alcohol and so on have been broken around the area. And it was very difficult to pick a landing path, particularly as I had had no control over the flight up to that stage. There was a degree of mayhem, and I did discuss this on the previous occasion. People yelling and screaming, following me. And then after that, people were moaning. And then having 2 minutes later, after this first upset, decided that I was now comfortable in what I was doing because I was back to the floor, it did it again. The second time it wasn't quite as steep. I got back to a weightless condition, and once again that was weird because this time I was away from the ceiling. I wasn't on the floor either, I was just sort of stuck in the middle. Once again I lowered my undercarriage, but it still didn't reach the floor. And then after that, the aircraft resumed normal flight by putting the ceiling and the floor back in the places I would have preferred. But there was mayhem in the aircraft, as you would imagine at the time. Now, something I didn't know at the time, of course, I put this down to severe clear air turbulence. Wrong. What had happened, this is from the flight data recorder showing what happened. It's showing lots of things. There it shows the autopilot. The autopilot disengaged there, and then all that meant was, and I don't understand this, and it wasn't mentioned in the report, the engines reduced power. So that thought, no, getting close to CAT. Not sure how we would know, but anyway. Then came this little thing here. It was a spike from the air data which was received on the air data unit. When that occurred, it was coincident with the aircraft first coming unstuck. That's the altitude. It came down to there, flew up to there, came down to there, and back up to there. Now this was not known as to exactly what was happening, obviously. The result of the first one, I got injuries to the back and to the shoulder, but to other people, spine lacerations, spine injuries, and some lacerations, a broken nose, and right next to me, one of the flight attendants broke his leg. This is uncluttered a little. That information I got from there is in fact part of the CASA review, and so Brian has been good enough to smooth out all the detail in there, and you can see the height profile. We actually went to minus 0.8 G. That doesn't obviously sound like much, but let's face it, it's not much below 1 G. Now, if you drop from a ceiling onto a floor with 1 G, which is where we'd be in our normal environment, it hurts a bit. Here, it was just in reverse. The ceiling dropped on me, effectively, at 0.8 G. So it still hurt, but it hurt many more people in the aircraft and many were not seated, many were seated, but many were not belted in the seat, and so that was one of the problems. And we were at that rate at 1,500 feet per minute during that particular descent. Now, anything going towards the ceiling in the two aisles of the aircraft, and there were people, and other loose objects, you saw what happened to the ceiling, which I pointed out on the previous occasion. You can see some people there where looks like someone's hit their head on the light on the way up. This one's gone straight through. Different views of the aircraft. The cabin damage was right to the front of the aircraft. and some people who, or one person at least, who couldn't hold their liquor, spilled that glass of red wine, or the glass of red wine went vertically. It was just after lunch. Now where this happened, this map was produced once, or this diagram was produced by CASA to point out what actually happened. The aircraft, as you can see, and I've got a second slide where I've blown this one up a little more, but the big picture was the aircraft coming down from Singapore. As it came past there, that's where the autopilot dropped out. And then there was the first upset, and then there was the second upset, and thereafter we continued on to land. That's the aircraft on the ground, looking quite docile there. That was the day after, and this photograph was taken by a pilot of another aircraft which is parked on the tarmac at the same time, obviously, as this one was. People from Learmonth came out to greet us, and I think everyone had a uniform, put it on, and we had a plethora of people who came to assist, and they kept us there from, we landed about, after 50 minutes after the first upset we actually landed. So the pilots were actually taking the aircraft down rather gradually, because we were virtually over the top of the Learmonth when it happened. It wasn't so hard to find a forced landing strip even for an aircraft of that size. But what had happened was, when the first upset occurred, there was, and the first set of injuries occurred, but I think one of them occurred to the first officer who was out of the cabin at the time getting some coffee. And we heard nothing during the next 20 minutes. You expected the captain to come on the air and apologise for something. Well, when he did come on the air and apologise, it was, I suppose you may have wondered about that control upset we occurred. Now, to someone who was fat, dumb and happy at that stage with a bit of clear air turbulence, the suggestion that we had a control difficulty cast a whole new light on the scene. And it also is the reason why the aircraft took so long to come down. Because these two uncommanded events had happened without the pilot's input whatsoever. They were hand flying the aircraft, but when an aircraft that you're hand flying all of a sudden dives, its nose dives down twice, you've got to have be a bit gun shy, I suppose, at that stage in bringing this aircraft closer to the ground where there's less room to recover if it does it again. My understanding is the pilots were still sweating until the wheels were firmly on the ground, because they said, well, one of them had said that during the approach you didn't know whether it was about to occur again, but if it did, you were going to be the first person at the crash site. So there was one could then understand why the captain took so long to do this. The captain, I'm told, well, I asked after him a year later when I was actually buying a Qantas ticket. I don't think I had to pay for that one. It was gratis after a rough flight or something. But anyway, they said that the captain had gone back to work after about a year off, but failed the test of starting work again and was retired for health reasons. And so, although I was a bit bewildered at the time that we got such a little amount of knowledge, in fact, I would rather have been one of the dumb passengers than a pilot who knew that things had happened over which he had no control. So why had it happened? Well, these people taking us ashore there, well, I'll stay where I was. We'll go on one. These were some marks on me after the flight. I've decided I'll wear more clothing in future. The aircraft that also arrived up there, we got a Boeing 767 sent from Perth, but unfortunately the A330 is pretty big, so to put a 767 on the same tarmac was impossible, and that was put on the RAAF side of the field instead, which meant it was very late at night by the time we all got bussed out to the aircraft on the other side of the field and back to Perth. The PC-12s, I think, came from Headland and Carnarvon. Anyway, they appeared and they started taking passengers who had severe back injuries. 717 brought up a whole lot of people who were involved with the federal police, the state police, immigration, customs. Remember, we were coming in from overseas. And so they were trucked up there the same way. Now, all of this need for police and so on became important when at least one passenger indicated that he wasn't going to continue any further and wanted to ring for a taxi to take him to Perth. So a little bit of local knowledge was deficient there, but people were trying to get out on the Great Northern Highway and go home that way. A lot of people on the aircraft didn't talk English that well, and so that could have added more confusion. The aircraft had come through from London, and it also picked up a lot of people in Singapore. And of course, you don't have to worry about that flight anymore because Qantas has stopped doing it as of the week before last. Now, this is the air data unit, which was the It's the air data inertial reference unit. I can remember it was an IRU, but not all the stuff on front of it. That's not just one that looks like the one on board, that is the one on board the aircraft. Once again, CASA was kind enough to send that around. There are 3 of these. This was number 1, didn't make a great deal of difference. It was 1 of 3 in a committee, and the way it works is the 3 put their heads together and they read all the stuff that comes in and they decide if any of it's spurious, they chop it out. Well, this one did send a spurious spike which said that the aircraft had an angle of attack of 56 degrees. Now on Airbus aircraft, you're not allowed to get to that angle, so the elevator went down and the tail went up. And that is what happened. Why did it happen? They don't know. There was a conspiracy theory at the time that this was as a result of the Northwest Cape radio at, what do they call it? The Holt Air, I forgot. Anyway, I used to talk to submarines from Northwest Cape. There was a big conspiracy theory that this was being caused by the Americans, who I don't think have had anything to do with the base for a long while now, but they did build it. And that it was caused by that. Well, we were 156 nautical miles away from that, apparently. They brought the same aircraft back to that area a few weeks later. They turned the power up full and they flew around for a couple of hours. They could not get anything that would have caused a problem. They pulled this unit apart and found no problems. They even went down to component level. So to that extent, it remains a mystery. This was something that was learned. Some people were wearing their seat belts and still hit the roof. And it wasn't, there were over a dozen of these people. And it turned out that with that particular type of seatbelt, if it's loose on you and you start to come up underneath it, and that catch ends up under the seat rest or armrest on the seat, it will open and you will continue on to wherever your body was headed previously, upwards. As a consequence of that, at least, I noticed that after we found out about this, on the next of the A330s on which I flew, the seatbelts have been changed. I don't know whether that was permanently put through the design was changed. I don't know whether it was was permanently put through on all the A330s or all the Qantas aircraft. But the inference was that it was being done certainly to all of the A330s, well, all with that. There was one other thing that the second officer was reported to have said, was that he was glad this hadn't happened in instrument meteorological conditions. He said they would have lost the aircraft at night. They had no idea what was happening. The captain didn't have any instruments, not electronic instruments, and the error reports flowing through the system were huge. You couldn't stop any of them because they were going through so fast. So they couldn't be attended to. So that was his belief, that they'd be lucky that it happened in the middle of the day. Now, the interesting thing about all of this, because they found that there was nothing on which they could hang their hats and say that's what caused it, was that the aircraft on which we were flying was QPA. So it was that aircraft, QPA. And this symptom of instruments rolling and error reports coming up on the screen had occurred in this aircraft back in September 2006. Same aircraft and the same air data reference unit. And then in December of 2008, the symptom started again coming out of Perth, but on a different A330. They'd read their books and they knew what to turn off or what not to touch, and the aircraft came straight back to Perth. And the last I read on that, there'd been no other such incidents had occurred on this aircraft. But of course, because all of this stuff had happened in the West Australian region, although hundreds of miles apart from each other, this became part of the conspiracy theory which was attributed to the Holt station. But they said that wasn't true. Eventually the whole lot went back to the maker, and then a whole lot of money flowed from Lloyd's London to everyone who'd been on the aircraft. Thanks.